In this episode of Path to the Draft, we're going to look at the path that led us to Dale Thomas and Scott Pendlebury. Let's get into it. In 2005, on draft night, Collingwood's path changed. We netted Dale Thomas with pick 2 and Scott Pendlebury with pick 5. But how did we get there? From a 2002 grand final, a 2003 grand final, to finishing 13th in 2004 and second last in 2005.
The three players chosen with the priority draft, Murphy Thomas for Collingwood and Xavier Ellis for Hawthorn.
What about the shag on Dale Thomas?
We're going to have to go back to 2005, in particular round 20, 2005, where we took on arch rivals Carlton in just a game that really had no meaning in just the general context of the AFL, but had so much meaning to Collingwood. Now, back then, and this is 20 years ago, which is just wild to think about, priority picks were given out to clubs who had 5 or less wins for the season. Now they're on an AFL need to know basis or need to want basis. If they think you need a priority pick, they'll give it to you. But back then, especially in 2005, 3 clubs were given priority picks. Carlton, who finished 18th, but they finished 16th on the ladder with 4 wins. Collingwood finished 15th on the ladder with 5 wins. And Hawthorn, who finished 3rd last with 5 wins as well. Now, you're probably wondering why the Carlton game mattered so much in the context of our priority picks. Carlton were last on the ladder. We, at the time, were on 5 wins. And 5 wins was just priority pick. We were getting a priority pick, but we still had 3 games left for the season. It was Carlton, first place Adelaide, and the Western Bulldogs, who were vying for a spot in the top 8. Now, it was in front of 48,000 fans. A Carlton Collingwood game at the MCG in front of 48,000 fans, which seems unfathomable right now. Like, these games don't get less than 80,000, on average, you would think. Probably 85,000 on average. But back then, these two teams were in the absolute pits. Yes, we came from back-to-back grand finals. 2004, like I said, we finished really low. And then 2005, we were absolutely decimated by injuries. There was just injuries coming out left, right, and center. And it was just a crazy season for the Pies.
Swan, that's an untidy handball, stolen by Eddie Betts. He loves to kick these, and he has. He can get them from anywhere, Eddie Betts.
To start off the season, we had only won 1 game out of our first 8, and then to end the season, we went on an 8-game losing streak. In those last 8 games, we were getting absolutely smacked. Round 19 against the Kangaroos, we lost by only a goal. And then when we played Carlton in round 20, that was probably the only game, or it was the only game left with a chance to actually win a game. Ultimately, we go down by 35 points in front of less than 50,000 people. Shane Wakeland and Scott Burns were playing their 200th game that night. It was Heritage Round, but from the offset, Carlton just had the jump on us. 7 goals in the first quarter to our 4 goals. By 3/4 time, they had a 42-point lead, and despite Nathan Buckley's heroics, kicking 4 goals, predominantly playing in the forward line because of his hamstring issues, we just couldn't get it done. But what that meant was we were pretty much guaranteed a priority pick, because the next week, or the next 2 weeks, like I said, we were playing Adelaide and the Western Bulldogs. It would go on that Adelaide would beat us by over 100 points, and the Bulldogs would just towel us up by goals and goals and goals. Now, for a pretty low season, just in general with all of our losses, that Carlton loss really hurt the most, because they were bottom of the ladder at the time. They had only 3 wins, so they were pretty much guaranteed a priority pick anyway. But we were just at our lowest point.
The knock away. As it stands right now, Carlton are off the bottom of the ladder. Win number 4 for the year, and it was emphatic. 19-15, 129 to 14-10, 94. Nathan Buckley was superb for the Magpies, but didn't have much help.
After the game, of course, lots of talk about tanking and all this sort of stuff. Eddie Maguire came out in his various media places, and he said, To be in the rooms after the game in the last 2 weeks to suggest that players were doing anything other than having a go is absolutely wrong. You scoff at people for saying, "Are you tanking?" For the simple reason, I don't think we're in the position to decide whether we win or lose. You just play your best. Now, in the subsequent years, like I said, the AFL would change how the priority picks worked, but we absolutely benefited from just having an incredibly bad season. And it wasn't because our squad was bad. It was, like I said, just decimated by injuries throughout the year. And we had only just played off in back-to-back grand finals 2 years prior to 2005. The game was that meaningless to everyone other than Carlton and Collingwood that Channel 10, who were broadcasting at the time, kicked us off their main slot to show the Port Adelaide and Adelaide showdown and put us onto Fox Footy when they, Fox Footy at the time, or Fox at the time, weren't doing this 24/7 media cycle that they had. So that was just shows you how low this Collingwood and Carlton game was. And now you can't get us off prime time, the Collingwood and Carlton games, because they're just an absolute spectacle now. So let me take you to draft night. So thanks to the priority pick only winning 5 games, our priority pick came in at number 2. With the first priority pick, Carlton picked Mark Murphy, who would later lead the club. With our priority pick number 2, we picked Dale Thomas, meaning we had another pick in the top 5 for finishing second on the ladder. With pick 5, we of course picked Scott Pendlebury, this unknown basketball prodigy who would later become not only the club's captain, would lead us to 2 flags, not as a captain, but would be there as a leader for those 2 flags, and is going to break the game's record.
Let's look at the next 16, which are effectively round 1. Josh Kennedy with the Blues, no surprises there. Pendlebury, as you mentioned, perhaps a little surprised that he was taken so early.
Eddie Maguire would come out in November after the draft and say that it felt a little bit like Christmas. And of course it did. Little bit were we to know at the time what these 2 players would do for Collingwood. But it just shows you that the path is always different. And that one loss, although it hurt, not only losing to Carlton, but losing to them when they were in the pits as well, last on the ladder, wooden spooners, even though it absolutely hurt, it was the catalyst for getting 2 incredible players and one legend, not only of Collingwood, but of the game, who you would think Pendlebury will be an AFL Hall of Famer, into the club and just change the trajectory of the Collingwood Football Club. If Collingwood had beaten Carlton on that day, or if Collingwood had just had 6 wins, there'd be no priority pick. Who knows who Hawthorn would have picked with their pick? They ended up picking Xavier Ellis with their priority pick. Would we have both Dale Thomas and Scott Pendlebury? No. Would we have one of them? Possibly. Could it have been Scott Pendlebury that we didn't have? Because then you got to, know that Carlton then had the next pick, and then it would have been us. Who knows who we would have picked with pick 5 if we would have gone for Dale Thomas or Scott Pendlebury if they were both still there. Thank you for watching this episode of Path to the Draft. Of course, we'll be back tomorrow doing a video every single day until the draft. I can't believe I committed to that. That is absolutely crazy, but leave your thoughts down below. If there's a play that you want me to look at, leave them down below and we'll have a look at them. But until then, like, comment, subscribe, tell your family, tell your friends, tell your pets, and until next time, double shackers, I'll sweep you later.